Hey everyone, this is Chris Herren, and you're listening to Jim on Base.
The Jim on Base show has teamed up with my new friends at Old Hillside Bourbon Company. I got two of my favorite bottles here, straight bourbon whiskey and the straight rye whiskey. So whenever you want to get on base with that authentic Kentucky bourbon taste, make sure you visit oldhillsidebourboncompany.com, their social media, Old Hillside CO, or pick up a bottle at Bevmo and Total Wine. Old Hillside Bourbon Company. They'll always get you on base. Welcome back to another episode of the Jim on Base show. For today's very special guest, we have on someone who played for the Denver Nuggets and the Boston Celtics. There's an Emmy-nominated ESPN documentary titled Unguarded about his life. He tours the country speaking to both youth and adults called Herren Talks, and also has a residential drug and rehab treatment center called Herren Wellness. Please welcome the great Chris Herren. How are you, Chris?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing good. Excited to have you on. And curious, where are you right now? Where do you live these days?
I live in Rhode Island. I live in Portsmouth, Rhode Island. Today I am sitting at my wellness center in Seekonk, Massachusetts. So pretty local.
Awesome. Yeah, I don't know if you know the comedian Tom Cotter. I just had him on about a week ago, and he's from Rhode Island.
Yeah. How was he?
Oh, he was great. He was funny. He was
Yeah,
putting some bits on me, so it went pretty good.
I like it.
And I know, obviously, you're from Fall River, Massachusetts, and seems kind of like a blue-collar type mill town, right? Is that kind of how it was growing up?
It was, the mill aspect of it was on its way out.
Mm.
So the town itself has, it struggled over the years because of that and the workforce leaving the area. But it's always been a blue collar town and a town that is very prideful.
And so you call Rhode Island home these days, and made me wonder, what did your parents do for work when you were growing up?
So my mom and dad had my brother and myself relatively young. I think my mom was 17 or 18 when Michael was born. And I was 20, she was 22 with me. So extremely young parents, faced a lot of adversity, a lot of challenges. The early part of my childhood was, in government housing. But my mom she was a worker and she was a grinder, and she wanted to make a better life for us. And so did my dad.
Mm.
My mom worked for the phone company, which eventually turned into Verizon, for roughly 30 years. And my dad was a politician most of my childhood. My dad was elected state representative when I was in elementary school, and kind of went through when I was in high school.
Wow. Okay.
Hmm.
And it was you and your older brother then growing up, right?
Yeah, Michael's 5 years older than me. He's, it was just us two.
And I know I saw him in the documentary. He has a lot of speaking parts in that. So were you guys both sports fans, I imagine, growing up? Like, who are your guys' favorite teams and players?
Growing up, it was always about the Celtics, right? I mean, we grew up, we were lucky enough to grow up in a generation with Larry Bird and Kevin McHale and Robert Parrish. But honestly, back then it was more about local basketball than it was about NBA basketball, more about local basketball than it was about college basketball. The high school that we attended, Durfee High School, had a rich tradition of basketball and a lot of pride around that sport. You could walk into our gym and have 4,000 people there for games. So that was kind of the focus as a kid. Like you didn't dream of being a Boston Celtic. You dreamt of being a Durfee Hilltopper.
And is there extra pressure? Because I know that was it your dad and grandpa and other, or maybe uncles all played there? So would they kind of critique your game, or is there an added pressure to that?
Yeah, listen, I think if my parents had a chance to do it over again, they'd probably do it differently. I think that there was an enormous amount of pressure on me. Not so much because of my dad or my grandparents, but probably from my brother. My brother's one of the most successful high school basketball players in this area
Hmm.
and still is to this day. In 2 years, he lost one game. He won multiple state championships. Um, so that was an extensive shadow that I had to kind of walk under. Um, and and in hindsight, it gave me a drive and a determination and a grit, because I wanted to be just like him.
Hmm. Well, are you still able to be a fan now of basketball or other sports, or once you've made it to the highest level, is it kind of like seeing too much behind the scenes to take the
Yeah,
magic
I'm
away?
not I'm not a huge fan of it. I'm a fan of people, right?
Hmm.
So there's players that play in the NBA that are special people, and I root for them. But my sport, if I'm going to sit down and watch any sport, it'd be football, boxing,
Hmm.
tennis.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, you look good these days. I mean, I can tell you're working out. So, do you still hit the court, or are you more of a gym guy now? Or
No, I'm more of a treadmill guy. I'm more of
okay,
a tennis guy. A little bit of a pickleball,
there we go.
um, which is that's my new thing. Any sport for me as an athlete, any sport that um, doesn't require a sub a substitute,
Mm.
I have the utmost respect for. So individual sports like golf, tennis, boxing, where you can't look at the coach and say, give me 5 minutes, let me reboot my system. um any sport that you're out there on your own, I have the utmost respect for.
Well, I was wondering because I've had a lot of athletes on, and maybe they're known for baseball, and I'll ask them, "Hey, when's the last?
Mhm.
What could you hit right now if you got in the cage?" And they always laugh, like, "Oh, I haven't been in the cage in years." So it makes me
Yeah,
wonder, how's your shot though? Do you still have a good shot when you hit the court, or?
I would say I wouldn't bet on me. I wouldn't bet on my jump shot. You know, there was a time I'd bet on it, but not today.
Yeah.
It requires such muscle memory and work and repetitions, that I've been so far away from for so long.
Well, one last thing on being a fan, I was curious. Like when you're playing for the Nuggets, you're playing for the hometown team, the Celtics. Were you ever able to go to games as a fan?
Um, I went to games. I brought my children to games. When I was a kid, my father being in politics, he brought me to games. But again, I'm more of I get more enjoyment watching it on TV than I do in person.
Hmm.
Um, I'd rather sit down with my family, with my son, and watch it in our living room than sitting live. Um, but all good.
Well, who are you away from, sports and all that? Like, are you big into music? Do you like traveling? I know you're a family man, so what do you like to do?
Yeah, I'm a homebody. Like that's where you can find me. I'm a creature of habit, and uh, my space is at my home. It's where I want to be. It's where I always am. Music has played a big part of my life, especially my childhood, growing up with my mom and doing chores on the weekend and listening to Jackson Brown or Marvin
Mm.
Gaye and artists such as. But um, you know, I think if anybody who knows me well knows that they'll find me at my house. There's no golf course. Like I don't golf. I don't do any of that.
Okay. Well, it's funny that you mentioned Jackson Brown because I remember hearing that in the Unguarded documentary. There's a little
Mm,
scene. So I was like, this guy's
yeah.
got good taste.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's my childhood. My mom would bump Jackson Brown in the morning on a Sunday morning when she was vacuuming.
Mm.
A little Lionel Richie, a little Marvin
Yeah.
Gaye, and so losing my mom at a young age, that's where the music matters to me.
Mm.
My mom died in her early 50s. So that's where the music comes from in my soul with her.
Gotcha. Well, I know you have three kids as well. I think you have an older
Mhm.
son, a daughter, and a younger son, right? So, what are they all up to? Because I think your older son played basketball in San Diego, right?
He did. Christopher's, he's finishing up at Boston College right now. Samantha's finishing up at PC, and Drew will be going into his freshman year of high school. So, it's all coming to an end. 25, 22, 25, 24, 22, and 15.
Awesome. Well, I know you're married too, and your wife was. We can see her in the Unguarded as well. And you met in sixth grade. So, how long you guys been together total? Then you got a good streak
Uh,
going.
oh gosh. I mean, we've been married for 25 years. We've known each other for almost 40, you know.
Wow.
Probably 36 years, 37 years. Yeah, it's wild. It's a relationship that started when we were 12. A friendship that began when we were in middle school. So, to go through this whole process together and now watch our children go through it and now become empty nesters is kind of wild.
Yeah. Does she help out with the wellness program, or like what does she do these days?
Yeah, I think they all do, right? I think, as I told my son the other day, um, although they're not directly involved, they're indirectly involved,
Mm,
like they have plenty of sweat equity in this, because of what they had to endure and what they had to go through in their childhood, as well as in the recovery. It's very close to their lives. They've had to live through that process right alongside of me. My wife is more directly involved with this company. My wife has been involved since day one. It's definitely a family business.
Well, one thing I forgot to mention too was you're 6'2", you're 195, so it's a solid frame. Just made me wonder, did you play other sports, or was it always just basketball?
6'2", 195. I was like 16. I'm not 6'2", 195 anymore. I wish my closet would be a lot different. So, I didn't. I grew up in a city that basketball was what mattered most. And I look back on that with great regret. Like I wish I was pushed into other sports. I wish I had that experience because at the end of the day, that's what we take away from playing is not, the individual and the accomplishments, it's the experience. And I wish I had more experience in other sports as a child. I played Little League Baseball, I played some soccer in that time frame, but once I got into middle school and high school, it just all became about basketball.
And like as you move on through life, I've always wondered, like obviously I'm having you on talking to you about playing in the NBA and your story,
Mhm.
but as you get older, do you like to get away from that, or is it does it kind of get old talking about it, or how do you feel about it?
I mean, I've done a lot of talking, right?
Yeah.
And not to mention the fact that I do a ton of speaking events. I do close to 200 speaking events a year. And countless podcasts and media interviews and outlets. And so does it get tiring? I mean, yeah. I mean, if I'm being honest, it gets a little tiring, but it's a part of my life, and it's a very special part of my life.
Mm.
And a part of my life that at 15 years sober, I reflect on and look at from a different lens than I did when I was younger.
Mm. Well, getting into your journey and getting into college, I thought it was neat because obviously you spent some time at Boston College. So is it kind of cool for you now, like full circle, to have your son go there?
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's Boston College would have been great for me, right? Again, it's how you look at it today. You know, there's a part of me that wishes I stuck it out and finished because of, how special of a school it is. Um, and it's local. It's in my backyard in a sense.
Mm.
But I moved 3,000 miles away to Fresno, and Fresno was an amazing community for me. It was an amazing opportunity. It was less like a college and more being part of a community in a city from my experience during those years in Fresno.
Well, it made me wonder, when you went to Boston College, you broke your wrist early on, and that's kind of when some failed drug tests happen and
Mm.
whatnot. So it made me wonder though, how's the wrist these days? Are you good? Do you have arthritis or
Yeah,
anything? Or?
yeah, the wrist is good. A couple of scars, but the wrist is all right. It's my left anyway. It's my offhand.
Oh, okay, there we go. Well, you eventually get to Fresno State, and I just had always thought that was kind of a quick rebound for you, right? Like I was
Mm.
wondering, how did that all work out? You played under Jerry Tarkanian. Did he approach you? Like, how did that all go down?
No, he approached me once I was announced that I was leaving BC. He approached me, but that was a very, very tough time in my life. I was 18 years old. I was in the early stages of battling with partying and cocaine. I was, newly publicly outed that, I struggled with drugs and alcohol. And moving 3,000 miles away from my home seemed like the best solution. But the truth is, I took it with me. And, I went out to Fresno with all good intentions, but unresolved, substance use issues, very uneducated about the illness. Back then in 1995, 1996, there was just a lot of shame attached to drug use. There was a lot of embarrassment, a lot of shame, and I live with that, which causes people not to face it. I was when I was at Fresno, I went to treatment when I was 21 years old, after failing some drug tests there. But as I say today, back then that was a punishment. It wasn't an opportunity. It was someone punishing me for some mistakes I made. It wasn't someone saying, "We love you, we care about you, we want you to reach your full potential. So we're going to give you this amazing opportunity to work on you." And unfortunately today, even, when you offer people an opportunity to get sober or enter the world of recovery, today even people look at it as like, as a punishment and,
Mm-hmm.
a handicap, a disability. And it's the furthest thing from. It's just back then in 1996, struggling with cocaine use and alcohol, something was really wrong with me. And I felt that, people were punishing me for this. And unfortunately, so I took that with me out to Fresno. I love Fresno. Coach Tarkanian was the man. Like I can never take that relationship will live with me forever. But again, I struggled in Fresno too.
Well, it made me wonder too, like going from Boston, the area you're from, and then going to Fresno. Were you
Mm.
mad, even though you had another opportunity? Were you embarrassed, frustrated? Like, what was? Because you looked like you had everything together when you're on the court,
Yeah.
you know.
No, and listen, I had a lot of people try to help me, right? I was surrounded by coaches who were familiar with sobriety, um, coaches who wanted me to get familiar with sobriety. But sobriety at 21 years old, 22 years old, it was just so foreign. As I tell people all the time, it's hard to be you 24/7. So never mind being you 24/7 at 21 years old. There was so much going on in my life that I wasn't able to kind of temper and hyper focus in on to resolve some of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But at Fresno, I had, I say it all the time, Fresno was more along the lines of a therapeutic approach with me and my struggle, and Boston College fell under the punitive approach in me.
Well, I guess too, when you're in Rolling Stone and you're in
Mm.
Sports Illustrated, is it easy to maybe get a little cocky when you're young like that, or how did you take that in?
Yeah, I mean, listen, it definitely can get to your head. There's no doubt about it, right? But honestly, at that time in my life, I was so, gosh, it's really hard to pin down. I was so insecure. I was so insecure at that time in my life, that even moments like that, big moments, whether it's Sports Illustrated or Rolling Stone, um, they didn't make me feel good. They didn't make me feel great. I couldn't really appreciate it. I mean, I look back now, right? Like being a kid from Fall River and becoming a Boston Celtic, I didn't appreciate that. I mentally and emotionally, I wasn't in a position where I could really digest that and understand the magnitude of it.
I was also thinking about back then too. Like right now, you have kind of the same hairstyle.
Hmm.
Still got the good hairline, but you had a cool look back then. You had different. You had the buzz cuts. You even dyed it bleach. So
Yeah, yeah. I think I had a guy bleach before most people. I would say that.
you started the
You
trend.
know, yeah, I did start a trend. It was the nightlife out in California that
Mhm.
brought me into bleaching my hair. Um, but yeah, listen, I was a kid who was, lost in many ways. Again, if I could talk to that kid and slow him down and slow myself down at that age and really kind of hone in on where I was at and what I was accomplishing and the things that I was able to do, life would be different, right? But I had this unresolved addiction,
Mm.
um, and the inability to be me. And that's really ultimately what it comes down to. I just didn't know how to be me, no matter with
Mm.
Sports Illustrated, Rolling Stone. That wasn't going to fix me.
Well, you eventually got drafted by the Denver Nuggets, 33rd overall pick. There's some footage of you that whole night and everything, and other periods around that time too. So I was wondering, was that meant initially to be like a documentary on the being drafted experience? Because then it ended up being
Yeah.
used for the Unguarded.
So at that time, it was a group of people that were working directly with HBO to do a deal with HBO. Fortunately for ESPN, when they decided to do the 30 for 30, there was a lot of footage. There were a lot of hours. There was a lot of tape that was kind of accumulated throughout years of when I was coming out of college and walking into my NBA experience. So, although it never turned into a documentary with HBO, that was the intent starting it. But then that footage was used later on with ESPN.
And what do you remember most about draft night? Is there like a certain memory that kind of sticks with you, or?
Yeah, I was home. I was with my wife, my son. I was nervous. It was scary. It's you're put in a position where you can be embarrassed, right? Like here I am. I have 1,000 people down at a club in Fall River watching it live, and I'm home. And fortunately, I got my name called, but I knew I was really really worried about that. And the truth is, if Dan Issel doesn't pick me at 33, I probably don't get drafted, right? You just needed one person who believed in you, and the Denver Nuggets happened to be that team at that time.
Well, I've heard you mention some veterans like Nick Van Exel, Antonio McDyess, kind of took you under their wing, looked out for you. So do you still keep in touch with those guys, or is there anyone else from your career that stick out too?
Yeah, I mean, I here and there, periodically cross paths, bump into each other, shoot text messages. McDyess, McLeod, Van Exel, Billups, you know, those are, I was much closer with the Denver Nuggets
Hmm.
group than I was with the Boston Celtics. I was fortunate to walk into a veteran team that had a lot of veteran leadership that were kind of cemented in their career at that time. And they went about, their profession a little differently. Guys like Bryant Stipp and Popeye Jones and Roy Rogers, guys who are all coaches in the NBA now.
Yeah.
I was fortunate to be attached and to be linked to a team like that.
Well, did you ever have a? I had Clifford Ray on the other day. He played for the Warriors back in the
Mhm.
day, and I asked him, "Did you ever have a welcome to the NBA moment? Is there anything like that with you?" And he mentioned Wilt Chamberlain blocking his dunk.
Yeah, no, I think, I was just fortunate to have guys who were willing to sacrifice for me. I mean, I remember learning how to dress and dress code and not having the resources to wear what everybody else was wearing, but I had teammates that wanted to take me shopping or give me some of their stuff. So I was in a very special group, when it was time to be welcomed into the NBA.
And when it comes to going from college to the NBA, and you're a great player in college, is there a big gap adjustment for you? Like when it comes to the talent level? Like, did you kind of have to recalibrate, or how'd that go?
Yeah, I mean, it was a huge gap adjustment. I mean, just size alone, right? I mean, it's just a different animal.
Hmm.
When a guy like me, 6'2", gets into the paint, it's much different getting into the paint in the NBA than it is in college, and it's much different in high school to college. So it's just size, right? You got to kind of adjust to size. But, ultimately, I can't really measure my NBA career because I was incredibly sick.
Hmm.
So when you talk about, like, the talent and disparity between, I wouldn't even know it because I was on a deadly amount of Oxycontin a day, when I was playing for the Celtics. I was on a deadly amount. So my focus was not basketball. My focus was hiding this secret from the people who love me
Hmm.
and maintaining this brutal addiction that I was living in.
Well, I remember I heard you say how during the off season, I think for the Nuggets, that's kind of when you came back home, you got into Oxy, right? And then you ended up getting traded to the Celtics, which would have been like a dream scenario, but obviously it was kind of a nightmare scenario, right? And
I mean, I was struggling. I was in the early stages of OxyContin, and that was my base. That's where I was introduced to it in Massachusetts. I had incredible access to substances while living in Massachusetts just because of it's my home. Um, and although I took that addiction out to Denver with me, quickly I realized I was bringing it home.
hmm. Well, one story I've heard you tell I thought was pretty crazy. I just had a question. Like, I know you went out to meet your drug dealer, right? Right before a game. It was getting close to game time. And you mentioned how you went out, like, in your jersey or warm up type attire to meet him. And I was just wondering, no fans recognized you or, like, asked you for autographs or anything?
No, it was in a player's parking lot. I mean,
Oh,
just the
okay.
way it was, yeah, yeah, the way it was set up.
Gotcha. I was picturing you walking through the arena. I was like, how did you were you able to do that?
No,
Okay. Well, I know you. One question I did have though is when you're using that and you're playing, how do you travel with that? Because don't you still have to go through certain levels of TSA and stuff? Or
no, but you fly private.
hmm, okay,
Yeah, so it's a private plane in a private airspace. So as far as access to bringing, and the truth is, it's not like, it's pounds of marijuana. I mean, it's a bottle of pills.
gotcha.
Um, but yeah, no, you didn't have to worry about that. The only time you had to worry about it was if you were playing the Raptors or the Vancouver going through customs.
Okay. And I know you eventually went overseas to play in places like Italy, right? Germany, China, Poland. I had Jay Billis on, and it sounds like a really great scenario, right? He made it sound like everything's kind of covered, paid for, whether it's laundry, car, rent. Did that enable the problem to continue?
No, I mean, honestly, I wasn't in a position to be or sustain being a professional athlete at that time,
Hmm.
right? I mean, I got somewhat lucky with some countries. I stuck a little longer than others. But I was in Italy for a month. I was in Turkey for 4 months. I was in China for 6 months. I lasted in Poland maybe a week and a half.
Okay.
Um, I was in Iran for 3 weeks. I was in the midst of a major drug addiction and trying to cover it up, not only emotionally and physically, but also financially. So I was flying to these countries to try to cover for what I'm losing and what I've lost due to a major drug addiction. So, I've had to make an amends to myself to all of those teams because the person they signed wasn't the person that they got.
Did your wife ever catch on to this, or I mean, I imagine she knew something was off, right? I was just wondering how you're able to juggle that.
Yeah, my wife caught on. I mean, she caught on pretty early on into OxyContin. I was playing in Turkey at the time. And she discovered, what I had been struggling with and the secret that I had been keeping for so long.
And made me think of two other guys in the NBA. I'm just wondering if you've ever, is there a way to like reach out to these guys or create some kind of relationship, like Chris Anderson, Delonte West? I know they've had their own struggles. Is there a way to, or is that not something that happens? Or
No, I mean, it might, if it happens privately. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's
yeah,
not something I would discuss openly if I'm reaching out to people who are
okay,
struggling.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a very private thing. I mean, there's people who struggle who reach out for help. I mean, and there's people who are struggling that, you know, I've contacted to be a resource for them. But, as far as talking about that openly, I would never tell somebody else's story.
And I was looking on your story. Are you 16 years sober now, or how long of a
15, coming
nice,
up on 16, August 1st.
awesome? And how did you build what you have now with your programs, speaking? Did you kind of have to get a regular job and build up, or how do you kind of get everything going that you've built?
Yeah, I mean, I initially had get well jobs, they call it in recovery, whether it was repossessing vehicles or teaching kids how to play basketball. My career happened very organically, right? I was willing to wait and let the next door open. Um, the speaking happened. Because someone trusted in me that I could walk into a school and tell a story appropriately. Um, and now, those speaking events have turned into thousands of speaking events. And, you know, Herren Project, my foundation, is just built off the fact that somebody helped me. So the least I could do is help someone else. And that's turned into thousands of people over the last decade. And, as I mentioned in the beginning, I'm sitting at my wellness center. 6 years ago, I wanted to create something special. I wanted to create something that I believed was was right for people who struggle with drugs and alcohol. And we've created this beautiful culture and have had thousands of people go through this program and get the care that they deserve and the care they need and not only them but their families. So there were gaps in the treatment business. There were things in that space that I didn't agree with. And I myself and my team, we've filled the gaps and we've created something really special here. And I don't take it lightly that thousands of people trust in my company to take on someone that they love who's struggling in their life. That they trust in us to drop them off and start the process of recovery.
I think it's interesting too. In the beginning, you had mentioned how in the past there's like a stigma, even now, of almost like you're being punished. So the fact that you've gone through it yourself and you know both angles of it, I imagine
Hmm.
that would be more of a successful program, right, to help people.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just doing the right thing, right? Whether you're in recovery or not in recovery, it's providing services and resources for people that can help them live a sustainable life in recovery. We have a very holistic approach here from, yoga and meditation and breath work and acupuncture and massage therapy and personal training and
Hmm.
and and then, step into the therapeutic side of that with life coaching and, group therapy. So I wanted to provide as much as possible to give someone the opportunity that I was given, and the life that I've lived, not only for me, for my family. And, sitting here, this is one of the greatest accomplishments in my life. And it's something that I am unbelievably blessed and proud of.
Well, even behind you, I see you got the like a wooden American flag with the Heron logo. So that's
Yeah,
pretty
yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, a former guest made it.
yeah.
We have a great community here. People from all over the country fly in.
Wow.
And again, for me, it's, I have to pinch myself sometimes that, that there's people out there that trust, and that's a big thing to drop off your 21-year-old son or 17-year-old daughter and say, please, please take care of them. That it's special.
Yeah. Well, can anyone's journey be different? Because I heard you and your journeys, like you had been sober for 45 days and then
Mhm.
maybe you had a relapse. Like, can someone, is there like a program where it's 6 months or does it just change for everyone how long it could last?
I think that's what we kind of pride ourselves on here is like the individual programming. I think everybody's recovery looks a little different, feels a little different. I think one thing I've always said is there's no finish line, right? You're never gonna cross the finish line in recovery. So like sometimes you gotta push it out a little bit. I know this, that if anyone is listening to this and are thinking about getting sober or have a loved one in recovery, the longer the better, right? The longer you stay in this setting, the higher the success rate. And, we've collected the data, we look at it, we analyze it, we critique it. And, one of the major contributing factors to long-term recovery is the willingness to stay in treatment for an extended period of time.
Well, I'm definitely going to put links in the bio and share it on social media so people can get involved, check it out if there's anyone
Mhm.
out there that needs help. And on top of that, I was curious, are you still coaching basketball? Because I know it looked like you were getting into that with kids and whatnot.
Yeah, no, I kind of got away from that about, oh gosh, it's been over a decade. And the thing for me was it wasn't even coaching basketball, it was coaching emotion, right? It was coaching self-esteem and self-worth. That's what the sport was for me. It was about building kids' confidence and creating a space where they enjoyed showing up to. But with my speaking today and the amount of events that I do over the last 10 years, um, I haven't been in the gym in a long time.
Well, what else is on the agenda today? Like, are you getting ready for hitting the road to go speak places or what's going on?
No, I'm speaking locally tomorrow, and I think I'm in Hilton Head tomorrow night. So I'm speaking at a little private school in this area in the morning, and then I jump on a flight to go down to Hilton Head for a couple of days. But it varies. It can be, the Midwest, the Pacific Northwest. It could be, local. I honestly I enjoy it all. I mean, it's a great responsibility, and it's an amazing opportunity when people put their faith in you to speak to children.
Do you get a little nervous still? I know you're always probably used to being looked at or watched, but do you get stage fright with the mic or no?
Yeah, of course. I mean, if I tell people all the time, once I'm not nervous, I need to stop
Mm.
because there's a lot of valid reasons to be nervous in this. And especially when I'm talking about and when I'm in front of children, the emotion that's ignited, the thoughts that come out, it's a big responsibility. And I've looked at it that way since I've started because I would want that thought process and that strategic of having someone speak in front of my kid. And how many speakers did you listen to in high school? Most high schools you might get one in 4 years, you might get two. So, that's a big moment for me, no matter where I am and where I go to speak.
Well, Chris, it was great to have you on the show, and it was fun to get to know you because I've known about you all
Yeah.
these years, so it's kind of surreal to then be able to talk to you. Thanks for giving me some time and coming on the show.
Yeah. Great to meet you, man. Thank you.